The cannabis industry in America today is growing twice as fast as Silicon Valley did at its peak. With this rapid growth comes deep concerns about the possible impact on our economy, our health, and our wallet. So who is out there working to keep the medical industry a healthy one? Welcome to the Dispense Magazine Podcast. I'm your host, Sven Hosford. In this episode, we'll discuss the soul of cannabis. A new organization in the Philadelphia area is working to keep all aspects of the industry focused on the right things. They look at the social equity of cannabis, which is a big picture view of the community impact, opportunity, diversity, patient advocacy, and social justice issues. We'll talk to the founding team of Soulful Cannabis. Serial entrepreneur Skip Shuda brings his industry executive experience to the team. Jason Mitchell has years of experience in managing dispensaries, and Julia Kline brings her experience as a nurse dealing directly with patients, along with working in advocacy organizations. This is a wide-ranging discussion on industry practices, holistic medicine, social justice, and how we can educate some key people to help end the stigma. Here's our conversation, starting with Skip Shuda. Skip, you have all the executive experience. You've been a serial entrepreneur, which I understand that to mean you did not make cereal, but in fact you made this. Is that correct?
That's correct. It was not creating the next form of Wheaties.
Yeah, you're not a Kellogg entrepreneur. So then you became a medical marijuana executive here in the state of Pennsylvania. You helped score very highly on the application and founded a dispensary, which had 2 locations. From your perspective, having been at that level, what were the needs in the industry that made you want to put this organization together?
Yeah, so you're right. I mean, my background is really I came out of the technology world where I had been an internet entrepreneur, if you will, back in the mid-90s. And started a company there. But 5 years ago, I started Green Rush Advisors to get into the education and advocacy space, put together some courses for people that would like to get into the space as career seekers or as business owners. And through those educational efforts, became connected with a group that ultimately I ended up applying with. And then, as you mentioned, helped spin up the first couple of the first dispensaries here in southeastern PA. I was the chief operating officer for about a year there. Jason was also part of our team there as general managers. He was instrumental in helping us getting things up and running. And I guess for me, the really interesting thing was the contrast between what I saw in the internet industry when that industry was getting started, because you had a lot of people coming out of professional backgrounds, people out of consulting businesses, business analytics, software developers. But in the cannabis world, what I see is a much more of a Wild West kind of effect. People from wide range of disciplines. Some of them coming out of illicit markets, and moving now into legal markets. Some people coming out of completely different and unrelated industries, and everybody's moving really fast. I mean, that does have commonality with the internet space, but in moving fast, I want to make sure we're not missing opportunities to really do this right. It's a new industry. We have a lot of practices in other industries, and you look at big tobacco, big pharma, big alcohol, and some of the practices are not things that we want to emulate or copy in the cannabis industry. This is an opportunity to really be a healing industry, and I think our business practices and the way we roll out this industry should reflect that. So for me, that was my motivation for starting Soulful Cannabis, and I knew I had like-minded partners with Julie and Jason.
And that's one of the things I've noticed with this industry, so much more than any other I've ever seen or been associated with, is that the people in it seem to be the business equivalent of extreme sports athletes. Like, they thrive on danger, they thrive on excitement. Do you count yourself among that? Is that an accurate description?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, in the sense that I've always gravitated towards startups, I guess that I am a little bit of a startup junkie, if you will.
Yeah.
So really love that kind of that energy of sort of a blank palette and what do you paint and how are we going to do that?
Well, in this case, though, we're not just talking about a single business. We're talking about an entire industry. And
That's
what I
right.
find unique about the way Pennsylvania put it together is all new businesses, even ones that come from out of state, have to partner with somebody in the state. And it's a whole new industry. Nobody knows anything about how anything is supposed to work.
So, so yeah, I would say that's where the adventure begins, right?
Well, Jason, yeah, I'm counting on you to give us the view from the store manager.
Well, so I'd say I was probably, in adding to Skip's story, I'd say I'm probably more of that adventure seeker, or dwelling in the gray area is kind of an exciting part for me, in that, like you said, there's so few of us. I've been doing this legally in the dispensation model for about 10 years now. The bulk of my experience came out of the Colorado market.
Mm-hmm.
Started there as a patient in 2008, 2009, worked my way up. Skip and I hooked up when he started that Green Rush course. I wanted to help him provide some content that was directly applicable to the space, not just in theory. So when we talk about, the majority of this is all brand new space, right? And Skip makes great reference to other older industries already have these grooves set as to what their models will be and how they're going to function. And we have this great opportunity in this industry to lay new grooves and to push ourselves in directions that we haven't necessarily looked at. So it's a tremendously exciting time. And also, I like that extreme sports analogy. I think there's a lot of unknown over the horizon.
It's never a dull moment. I got to say that.
Not at all.
Now, from your perspective as being a store manager out in Colorado and then here in Pennsylvania, what were the needs you saw within the industry that brought you to the table with Skip and Julia to form this organization?
Well, like Skip said, with so many people coming from so many different backgrounds, I believe there's an inherent need to blaze a high standard and path. I felt, as a minority in this industry, was certainly a voice that needed to be heard. And as a patient's advocate, I always like to make sure that that we remember that this is healthcare, and we're bringing this through as a patient's benefit. We talk about the startup of an industry, but the reality is this is a plant for the people and for the patient. So I think in trying to just maintain those standards and remind ourselves that we're here to serve people on a high level.
Well, Julia Kline, let's get you into the conversation too. You started out as a nurse, and I love this in your bio on the website that you saw all the damage that opioids were doing, and you were reminded of the Hippocratic Oath and decided there was a better way to do things. What kind of needs do you see as somebody who's been a patient advocate for so long?
Okay, yes. So I am still a nurse, and yes, I guess I am a thrill seeker as well, since I work in the emergency department. So yeah, like I said, never a dull moment. So my biggest what I saw was, and I still see every single day, is patient need for education. They don't even understand how to take the first step to become a patient. So I'm always guiding and directing and advising, and some people are scared. There's all different things happening, and we're just here to help and to guide and to maintain ethics and standards.
Mm-hmm. Now, I know from talking with people that train a lot of doctors and the doctors themselves, they have a kind of an aha moment when they learn about the endocannabinoid system. And suddenly it just shifts their entire view almost instantaneously. And the stigma falls away and all that sort of thing seems to happen. Are there key things that you can say to patients that give them that same kind of aha moment where they go, oh, this isn't something evil. This isn't wicked. I'm not going to take an axe to my mother or anything if I use this product. Do you have anything like that that you could tell people?
Sure, there's several key things. One of them is about how CBD is not only in the cannabis plant, but it's also in other things such as basil, and it's just a naturally occurring thing that our body is made for. Our spinal cord has receptors on it, so it's like a lock and key. So that's one thing. The other thing is just that there is no deaths ever reported. There, you can't die. It's a safe option. So, when you look at the alternatives, it's always,
It does seem to be crazy that people will be okay with taking an opioid, which kills tens of thousands of Americans every year, and hesitate over a plant that's never killed anybody.
Right. No, that's where we get into that conversation of education and information. It's been such a good job of misinformation out there over the last couple of generations that, even with an open door policy, it takes so much dissemination of positive information to start to break down that trained response to what we were trained to believe drugs are, as opposed to what drugs, today really are being defined as.
Yeah.
Right.
Let's get into your collective, your organization, Soulful Cannabis, which I love the name. You one of the key things you're doing is events, and you recently had an event here last month. Tell us about the event and how it was received. Skip, you want to start off that?
Sure, I can start off. We had an event in late February here in Media, PA, which is just outside of Philadelphia. We had about 130 people at the event. We had sponsors from some of the leading grower processors and dispensaries in the area. CannaCare Docs was there to help register patients. They registered over 40 patients that day in the Department of Health system. And we just had some great speakers, panelists, conversations. We started off with some medical speakers and panelists, and then we moved into patients, caregivers, and parents. Had some very powerful stories. And by the way, we have a Soulful Cannabis YouTube channel now, and you can see all of the events on the Soulful Cannabis channel on YouTube. And then we wrapped the day up with an industry roundtable, which we really saw as a springboard into starting these conversations around accountability by the businesses in the space. We also started signing people up for special interest groups. So we now have, actually, Julie's going to be hosting our first caregiver circle. So we have people interested in caregiving. We have people interested in hemp, people interested in spirit and energy of the cannabis plant and relationship with the cannabis plant. Industry roundtable. So we're letting these circles form based on interest of the people that come to us and join us. And then we're starting to set up these smaller follow-on venues, which might just be phone calls or they might be smaller meetups. And then we're continuing to look at venues for our next event. So that's sort of an overview. I'll let Jason or Julie jump in with any other things they'd like to say about that.
Yeah, Jason, I know we talked a couple of days ago, and you mentioned third-party tools, things that can be used within the industry. Do you want to expand upon that some?
Sure. Again, I think the intent, next phase is really, like Skip mentioned, not only facilitating a platform for education and information, flowing in both directions, getting the state to the manufacturers and dispensaries across the state to participate on a high level, but to also then give, to give the industry a third-party tool to go out and do things like plug into your community in social outreach models, or hold say it again.
A job fair.
Yeah, hold job fairs in disheveled neighborhoods, or areas that have been highly impacted by the war on drugs, by over policing. When we talk about social equity and justice conversation, it's really about, so as this new industry ushers in the $1 billion age, what do we do to ensure that everybody gets to share in that expansion?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I'd like to mention also we have a mobile app for Soulful Cannabis as well. So that's been one of the tools, sort of, in your hand kind of tools that we're providing, where we can drive out some of the resources.
Well, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, we should expect that from you, the technology guy. Right?
Yeah, we actually have a great partner who's Jesse Brookman, who's been helping us that through XYZ software to pull that together. But
it's a great access point for a lot of good information, recipes, up-to-date state information, some of the sponsor connections. Just a great location.
Huh. Well, one of the people I know you had at your event, somebody I just interviewed for podcast and for an article, is Felicia Greenfield Blau.
Yeah.
And this is kind of my area of interest too, is I published holistic health magazines for 25 years. And it's just really heartening to see the way that cannabis and holistic healing and holistic therapies are just working so hand in glove now. Julia, do you want to speak a little bit about the importance or the kind of results you've seen with people who embrace more of these kinds of therapies and holistic philosophies?
Absolutely. The things I have seen just over the past year have been amazing. The benefits, I've always been a holistic nurse, always myself as well. Just wanting to help and heal. And so from a personal standpoint, I have seen my father and Jason's mother as well just embrace the whole plant extract, and it has started changing their lives. My father was dependent on benzos to sleep, alcohol to function during the day. He made a decision and he chose the plant, and he has been free of both since. The benzos he has cut down to a very, very minuscule amount to help with sleep, but he is working on eliminating that. Jason's mother is cutting her insulin intake in half. There's just these unknown benefits that are just happening as we speak, changing lives. And again, even more personal. I had broken my back 3 years ago, and was sent home with a large tub of opioids.
Wow.
And so, like I said, I knew too much. I saw too many overdoses of young people, old people, people of every color. It doesn't matter. It affects everybody. Yeah. And it has been medicine that is changing lives.
Wow.
And Julie and I also had the opportunity to participate together in that Kundalini yoga and gong therapy event.
Yeah. That looks really interesting.
Which had a cannabis component as well, which was very interesting to sort of integrate that into the whole meditative experience. Really powerful.
Yeah, talk more about that. So you were medicating and doing Kundalini yoga, which is pretty invigorating usually. There's a lot of heavy breath work that goes on.
Yeah.
And then at some point you turned on the gongs as well. So you're vibrating to a whole new frequency there.
That's right. Julie, I don't know if you want to talk about it or I can describe it. Either way.
Go ahead, Skip. You got it.
It was, so this was an event that was put on by a friend of ours over at Village Wellness in Berwyn. They wanted to do it right, so they checked with me. I checked with the patient advocate at the Department of Health, and she said, yeah, this is the kind of events we'd like to see more of. So it was only open to people with patient cards, and basically said, bring your vaporizer, no smoking and no edibles, but you can bring your vaporizer. And then Lance, the director over there at Village Wellness, led us through the Kundalini experience. I think we medicated right before the Kundalini yoga. And then after the Kundalini yoga, we medicated again. So we all used our vaporizers for a moment. And then we went into the gong therapy. And the interesting thing is, after having gone through that Kundalini yoga, where you really open up all these channels in your body, it was like, for me anyway, the effect was much more profound. Yeah, I mean, it was through the whole body. I mean, really feeling it all through my body, and just in a really wonderful way, very relaxing. And then we laid down for the gong therapy. And a lot of us actually reported like the sensations of an out-of-body experience. Lance then also told us that that cannabis is associated with, what was it? Was it the liver in Chinese medicine, Julie? And that the liver, I think he said the liver, the cannabis is associated with the liver, and that liver is also associated with out-of-body experiences. So he thought it was interesting that people were sort of self-reporting this uplifting experience through this meditation. It was really cool.
Yeah.
Well, my next question is, when are you bringing that to Pittsburgh? My goodness, that sounds like fun.
Well, we should talk. Yeah.
You should talk. Right?
Well, again, I think we toss around these words like holistic and vibration and energy, and those of us that know that's the connection between us and the planet, right? Whether it's a gong, whether it's hitting that right mental vibration state in breathing practices. I think we're just finding, again, these tools like the cannabis plant that just helps us elevate our own natural state, rather than this ideology of toxicity that we in this society certainly like to indulge in, whether it's food, alcohol, tobacco, whatever it is. Just being able to balance some of that out with a more holistic approach, I think, vibrates with people. And I think, we get excited when we hear the state say that this is exactly what they're looking for. I mean, this is exactly what we're trying to promote, is that opening of people's inner self, that third eye, whatever it is, reaching that next vibration of enlightenment.
I couldn't agree more. Could not agree more.
And we set up a special interest group for spirit and energy to kind of follow some of those threads.
Oh yeah.
It's not for everyone, but the people that are interested in that can join in. We can explore that more deeply.
Where do we find that?
So if you sign up for our newsletter, you're actually given the option to express an interest in the different groups, the circles that we're forming. So you can go to our soulfulcannabis.com website and sign up for the newsletter, and you'll be given the option to join one of the circles, or one or more of the circles.
Excellent.
Sven, it sounds like you should join the spiritual circle. We'd love to bring you to Pittsburgh. I'd be interested.
Yeah. Well, like I say, I published a magazine for 25 years, so I know a few people that do this or that, and I've certainly had my experiences with everything that you talked about.
Right.
One subject I think we should talk about a little bit, because it's likely to have an impact on your mission, which is to create a better industry, to have the industry be the best version of itself. And that is the question of legalization for adult recreational use. Jason, you've been in Colorado, you've seen the transition from medical to also recreational. What impact is that likely to have on the medicinal industry here in Pennsylvania, do you think?
Well, think and hope. Let's remember the difference there. I want to clarify, I think, with the use of the word recreational, I think it gets a bit outside the box. My experience has been, and I'm sure a lot of people may question my belief, but my experience is the majority of people who have engaged in cannabis use are using it in some wellness form, even if it's, we've been taught to call it recreational use. Say I want to go in and use it to alter my mood, to uplift my mood. Well, we're not using benzos recreationally, and that's exactly what they're being prescribed for. So the idea of mood stabilizers being recreational is kind of interesting to me. So I'm for freeing the plant first and foremost, and I think however we have to get it there, I think is a good thing. I do believe the bulk of use is wellness related.
That's actually one of the questions I was going to ask. Yeah.
So then my biggest hope is that Pennsylvania is trying to put some key legislation in place for, the clinical registrant portion of this cannabis law in PA, legislation in PA. Lets me believe that even as we go into an adult use model, the clinical registrant will always be there in a decent form to support med patients. Whereas when you go to other states that roll from medical into adult use recreational, there seems to be less support given to the medical side because it just doesn't seem to be as financially beneficial to the state. So I am excited about, Pennsylvania pushing the forefront and keeping that CR reg stuff in there and binding some colleges and some companies together to kind of, lock down a medicinal outlet and inlet for the future.
With good research. Yeah.
Julia, what do you see as the possible complications or concerns that we would have about adult use versus the medicinal?
I think I mirror what Jason said about, even separating it. It is all used in wellness. Even, just the saying getting high, like we were just talking about, raising our vibration. That's all we're doing. We're all just connecting. So, and funding, with support and research, I just think it's going to open up the doors for research that is founded in science and evidence base.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I'd just like to add, I think it's important, we're all free the plant advocates. So, the idea of home grows, for example, I think is important for patients in particular, when they're looking at requiring a large amount of medicine on a, monthly basis. If they can produce some of that on their own, I think that's going to help them dramatically. And again, the downside is really minimal in terms of the health risks and that's, in terms of the toxicity. So I think that's something that I'm looking forward to in any kind of adult use legislation. I think we also have to always be vigilant. Anything can be abused. You can overdose on water, literally. You can drink so much that your organs will shut down. So, while there are no, cannabis abuse is not going to lead to death. I mean, I think everything should be used in moderation and balance, as indicated by the needs of the individual who's using it. So that's something that I think we should remain vigilant around.
Yeah. Now, of course, the huge issue around the idea of legalization is the social justice aspect, and the fact that we've got a lot of people in jail right now, and we're still putting people in jail for doing the same thing that a whole bunch of other people get to do as a business.
And make a lot of money in doing it, yeah.
And make a lot of money at doing it. So is this a part of your, the goals within your organization or the hopes within your organization is that, we've got to come to a better balance around this. We've got to get those people out of jail. We've got to re-enter them into society.
And expungement programs that are going to erase these records of this unjust war on drugs, which is really a war on people, particularly people in of color and in communities of poverty. So that kind of restoring the balance is a big part of what we're trying to do. And so I think we're big proponents for expungement programs. We're big proponents of changing the laws so people can participate in this industry and, bring their knowledge of the plant to the table. So I think that's really important. And a lot of this is educating individuals in our communities about the stigma and helping to reverse that stigma as well. So I think that is very much a key part of where we want to go with this.
Jason, do you think as we destigmatize the plant, this will help bring the races together in some way?
I do. Again, for lack of sounding hokey, I do believe that's one of the plant's intent as a female. I think her energy it's a unifying experience. It really is. And, all of us know at the end of the day, it's a lot harder to be aggressive and aggravated when you sit down and have a detailed connection with this plant, So I do believe it's, you say it's not a primary goal, but I believe it brings out this conversation that says just that. We've spent the last couple of generations prosecuting a particular group of people for distribution of this plant. We are now going to reward a different demographic for that same distribution. Let's at least be conscientious of who was paying the price, and let's try to bring them to the fold in an equitable manner. And that doesn't mean just giving them an opportunity at the job, but maybe it means elevating them in some other ways, like microloans or, pursuant of a future that they had taken away from them with this conviction, with this burden of conviction over the last, 40, 50 years in the war on drugs. So yeah, I think it's I certainly believe she's a unifier.
Right.
Yeah.
And as you look at the resources that are being generated through tax revenues and that sort of thing, I think to just follow on, put an exclamation point on Jason's point, is making sure that those resources are being reinvested in these communities that have been disproportionately affected. So where does the money go? People will say, "Oh, what are we going to spend the money on?" Well, okay, let's take a look at these communities that have been really ravaged by the war on drugs.
Right, that have been devastated by over-policing and over-monitoring and shooting fish in a barrel, essentially, for this privatized police system or privatized jail systems. And just, again, moving forward conscientiously and thoughtfully as to who was displaced and affected.
And then the next question is, we've just been through a trauma here in Pittsburgh with Antoine Rose being shot in the back by a policeman, and then the jury saying, well, that's okay. And, I had a conversation on Saturday with Giselle Fetterman, the second lady of Pennsylvania, and the lawmakers who are pushing for the legalization. Well, Antoine Rose was a friend of hers. He volunteered at her organizations. So is there, I mean, you can't really separate the social justice aspect of the war on cannabis with what seems to be a war on people of color by the police. Is there any way to heal those things together?
I believe it is. It is, as consequence, it is the same. You are talking about parallels. So my experience has been is with education, not only do we educate the general populace, but you educate police officers and peace officers and people in that former school of thought. And I invite those types of people to come in and engage as much information as they can, because that's how we normalize this. That's how they have also, not to point fingers, and they've been also, in this equation, they've been told what a certain scenario looks like, where to go. I don't believe all people are bad-hearted. I do believe it's going to have to start with some very direct and potentially uncomfortable conversations about how our society presently views people of color generally, and where they fit in, and how, if we're going to talk about equity, what that looks like.
Which I've just only recently become aware of just how different the relationship is between white people in cannabis and people of color in cannabis.
It's completely
profoundly different relationship.
It is. It is completely.
It's been used as a weapon to attack that community.
Yep. So that makes it extra difficult, to go into the places that we really want to have an impact. You want to go to the churches. You want to talk to the social leaders in those communities, and they've seen their communities decimated. They've seen their nieces, nephews, uncles, fathers, males across the board get removed and used as, grist in a mill to further this proponents of the war on drug and what it looks like. And then so we have an extra difficult hurdle to climb in getting into that conversation. Yeah. And we slowly see that start to fall. In New York State, we're seeing some very conscientious development by minority leadership to go into the church, to go into the community, to create some legislation that guarantees, for lack of better words, affirmative action in those communities, allowing mom and pop of color to be first in line for these distribution licenses, to not create financially exclusionary scenarios where if you want licensing, it's going to be tens or if not hundreds of thousands of dollars to be involved. So that's where it has to start.
Yeah. Skip, you know the people, a lot of the people at the executive level in Pennsylvania. By and large, do they get it? Do they understand this, what we've just been talking about?
I think it's an evolution. I mean, there's a humility that I've experienced in, just ever since I've been working with Jason and Julie on this path. We've had countless conversations around these issues of stigma, of restorative justice, and what that means and how it translates. So personally, I feel that myself going through this journey. And what I'm experiencing as I engage with different industry leaders is they're also going through this journey with us. And some of them are a little further along in terms of really pushing hard on progressive issues and restorative justice issues. And some of them are lagging behind. But I think by and by, most people are willing to have the conversation. And we'll see as we start doing these industry roundtable events, how engaged people will be.
I am so sure Skip can hear my cynical grin. I love his optimism. I love his optimism, and I would just say, yeah, I'd say that there are an astounding number of people who are woke to these subjects, but not nearly enough and I take it to heart to continue to wake people up.
Well, I honor your commitment to more wokeness. I think the more woke, the better, frankly.
I couldn't agree more.
Amen.
Well, we've gone a good ways here. We've covered a lot of territory. Before we wrap up, is there any last thoughts you have specifically about your organization and how you want to move forward? Let's start with Julia.
Last thoughts would just be the more the merrier. We're co-op, and we invite everyone. So there's a lot of, there's other people that have these same ideas that they want to fight for the rights of the plant and the people. So we just want to come together and make it happen, and from the ground up,
That's the way all change happens. Skip, any last thoughts?
Yeah, I think I agree with Julia. We want to be a hub. That's really the way we've designed ourselves, and we want to help facilitate these discussions and really build on the hope and promise of this plant in the industry. So we're excited by that, and as Jason says, I'm optimistic. So we'll keep pushing.
We should have left you for that. Jason, any last thoughts?
Well, now I feel like I have to be extra optimistic. Yeah. Sven, I want to thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to have these conversations all the time. And,
you bet.
I had this visual image in my head listening to the end here about, we're the tsunami, right? Like, you don't see much happening. And as we get closer to function, and now we're at 30 plus states that have some sort of decriminalized or medical conversation, and the ball is just continuing to roll. Building a collective allows us to amplify greater voices. The more we put together, the more listen to this conversation, the more expansion we have, the louder and more directed that voice becomes. And I think it's inevitable at this point. So I'm just grateful to have a platform to participate in with amazing people that seem to draw more and more people to it. And we're definitely, the timing is now.
Yeah. Well, and I'd like to say that even though I like to make fun a little bit of the extreme sports analogy and the people in the industry, I've also found that by and large, they have the biggest hearts, and they are really amped up about getting out there and helping people every single day.
Yeah.
And across the board in every part of the industry.
Yeah, no, and I think you're included in that group, Sven. So we do appreciate you bringing us into your conversation as well. So really grateful for that too.
Well, all for one and one for all, I guess, right?
That's right.
Absolutely.
Well, Skip Shuda, Jason Mitchell, and Julia Kline, it's been such a pleasure. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having us, man.
Thank you very much.
A real pleasure. Honored. Thank you.
That's it for this episode of the Dispense Magazine Podcast. If you'd like to read a printed version of this interview, you can find print copies of our magazine at every Pennsylvania dispensary, as well as dozens of doctor's offices, holistic centers, and retail locations across the state. To find out where or to read a copy online, visit dispensemagazine.com. I'm Sven Hosford. Thanks for listening. This has been a production of Mindful Medicine, LLC.